Hello and welcome to another episode of Deploy Friday, the Platform SH web show, where we talk about interesting topics with cool people, or sometimes cool topics with interesting people. Which it'll be? Let's find out. Today we're continuing our Language Spotlight series, looking at another one of the languages that you can run on Platform SH. And today we're talking about Java, everyone's favorite coffee, by which I mean language.
Woo!
Had to get the joke out of the way early. And we're joined today by Monica Beckwith. Say hi, Monica.
Hi, everyone.
And I apologize, I'm going to butcher the name. Geertjan Wielenga?
It's pretty good. Hi,
Okay,
everybody.
I try. All right, so let's start off. Monica, tell us a bit about who you are, what are you doing here? What do you do?
I'm Monica. I'm a Java champion, and I've been working with Openjdk, from the JVM perspective, so garbage collection, JIT code, and kind of sympathizing with the hardware, so ARM64, AMD, x86 64, and kind of optimizing from that perspective. And it's been almost 2 decades now. So I started back in 2002-ish, working on performance and JIT compilers back then.
Oh, that's around the last time I was doing serious Java myself, so. All right, there's a lot to unpack there, but before we do, Geertjan, tell us a bit about you.
I joined Sun Microsystems in 2004 to work on NetBeans, one of the popular Java development environments written in Java. And then, of course, there was the takeover by Oracle in 2010. And at the time, I was a technical writer and trainer of usage of NetBeans IDE and of its APIs, because you can build on top of NetBeans your own Java desktop applications. And then became part of Oracle and worked more on the front end and within Oracle, but was involved in the process of bringing NetBeans into Apache, where it is now. It's an Apache Software Foundation project, the largest in terms of code at this point. And it's going really well over there. And in the meantime, I've moved on to Azul, where I lead open source projects, and in particular Fuji, which is something comparable to Java.net, which some people may remember from Sun Microsystems, a generic documentation platform, information platform, community platform, bringing together all the information.
Uh-oh, we're having a little trouble with Geertjan, I think. All right, well, until his signal picks back up, and of course, neglected to mention, I'm also joined here on the platform side by my Java fan colleague, Otavio Santana.
Hello, everybody. That's amazing to be here with available people, and for sure you, Larry. That's amazing to talk about the most popular language in the world right now.
I think C still beats it, but not by much.
Yeah, that's a huge discussion around that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's 3 leading Java people and me. So I'm feeling a little bit inferior here. So let's start at the
Don't
beginning.
be afraid. Okay.
Let's start at the beginning. As Otavio said, Java is one of the top languages in the world at this point. How did it get there? Monica, you've been around for a while in Java land. So how exactly did Java get to be Java?
I think Java has great strong backing in the whole object-oriented concepts, right? And starting from C++, you wanted to be more towards the server side, and Java helped provide that. I think from the beginning, if I look from the JVM perspective, Java was very sympathetic to these growing core counts and memory and everything. So as we expanded to different nodes, added more cores, Java was right there. And with this strong memory management backing Java programming language, there was no turning back. So by strong, I mean the GC keeps evolving and kind of adjusting to the needs of the day or decade. So we started with footprint optimizations. We went to throughput optimizations, and now we're dealing with lower latency. So Java is keeping up with the trends from if you look from the bottom up. So the more you're going towards like quick responsiveness, that's where the GC is at today. And so I'm pretty happy with the way the JVM has kept up with the trends. And I think from programming language perspective, I'm sure Geertjan could tell us more because now he's back. Or maybe not.
Geertjan, you there?
Oops.
Looks like he's still having some trouble. So now, just to clarify, GC, you're talking about the garbage collection that Java does.
That
Now,
is
Java
correct.
was one of the first really popular languages to do garbage collection, I think. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong on that. But at this point, it's by no means the only. Most languages at this point have either adopted some kind of garbage collection or system, or they've gone the direction of Rust and set it up so that you can't write memory leaks in the first place. Why was that such a key feature for Java? Why did they decide to go that route with the language? Just in the early 90s, that was not really a thing yet.
Yeah, I think, and I wouldn't know, and you would have to ask the people that designed, at the very beginning of Java stages. I think it was basically from a simplicity perspective, because there are so many optimizations. So if, for example, now you wanted to do a malloc, in the current
Memory
situation,
allocation for
memory allocation. Sorry,
people who aren't engine engineers.
sorry, I'm so sorry. So yeah, let's back up a bit.
Yeah.
I want to allocate a huge array, right?
Mhm.
There's different ways I can do it. Now, in order to be able to talk the language of the underlying processor, the underlying architecture, I want to be sympathetic to how I'm accessing memory, because processors have caches, and there are different levels of caches. They're at the beginning, like back in 2002-ish, when we went into 64-bit x86 systems, we had only, I think, L2, maybe L3 was really small back then. So as and when you write these routines, your program to access memory, you have to be sympathetic to these kind of latencies. And also there's a concept of cache lines. So all these things you want to keep away, in a way, from the concerns of a developer, and kind of handle it in the background. So these optimizations, this memory management related optimization that can be sympathetic to the hardware, and is something I think that can be done easily with the garbage collection, with an automatic memory manager. So I think if it was me back then that decided this, that would be my reasoning.
So it's not just a matter of making life easier for the developers. They don't have to think about manually managing memory. It's also the portability that you're after, or that Java is after.
That is correct. There will be many optimizations that understand, and that's there was one of these things that people always ask me, what is it that makes Java so usable, so approachable in a way, right? And I always say the whole concept of write once, run anywhere is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, for example, we recently did this port for Java on Windows and ARM. It didn't exist. And so because of this new platform, we knew that it should be available to all Java developers, as well as people that want to run Java applications. So runtime, as well as the JDK, should be available. So we ported Openjdk to this new platform. So the write once, run anywhere becomes, like I said, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you get the advantages of ARM and Windows. So basically, you can use, you're working with the Windows compiler, you're working with the ARM atomics or different optimizations that ARM architecture provides. So, and you bring it to the Java user, developer out there. So.
Okay. So, Geertjan, you joining us again?
Yes, I'm hoping it's a bit more visible this time.
Okay. So we were just talking about the garbage collector a lot, but Java has a lot more going for it than just its garbage collection. As you said, a lot of languages do that now. What would you say is Java's defining attribute as a language or as a community or as an ecosystem? What is the quintessentially Java thing about it?
I would say definitely, I would agree on the garbage collection side and on the portability. But what I think has sustained Java is it.
Oh no.
Again, that's a garbage collector running, right? Stop the word.
No, that's your
Okay.
networking. So this is pretty. That's pretty interesting. People always blame the garbage collector, and I mean, of course, there are times that it should be blamed, right? But then there are many times it's the actual network issue or some other bottleneck that. But people always relate the stop the world events to garbage collection events, and the stop the world events, the safe pointing, as we call it, are much more than the GC itself. So and you know what, in the newer GCs like ZGC and Shenandoah, they actually reduce your stop the world pauses so to just bare minimum. So you do the initial mark, you do the remark, and these are very, very small, predictable stop the world pauses, and everything else, including copying of live objects, is done in the background, so to speak. It's done concurrently, so that you wouldn't really get those pause, and that's why they're called low latency collectors. So I mean, many of these newer collectors boast of 1 millisecond or less of these stop the world pauses. So it's I mean, GC is getting more adaptive and more sensitive to lower latency needs.
So
okay.
We're waiting for Geertjan to get back. What would you say is Java's quintessential feature? Is it the garbage collection or something else? Since a lot of languages do that now.
Well, I think Java had a head start, and if we continue down the garbage collection and memory management aspect, I think it is one of those defining attributes. So Java and memory management the evolution of the language itself, as well as the evolution of the JVM and garbage collector itself, they went together hand in hand. So if we think about the optimizations, the growth of Java, it's not just in the language level, like adding more functional language features or covering a wider base on the JVM. It's also the evolution of optimizations that have gone into the JVM. So, for example, you have thread local allocation buffers, and now you would see similar concept, and I was talking about malloc, right? So the memory allocation library from C. And if you look at these memory management routines that have been introduced by Facebook and others, and I think it's called JE malloc, they do these kind of chunking as well, like you optimize based on the size of allocation, and thread local allocation buffers in Java, they kind of make sure that the global locks are kept to a minimum. So I'm going to be quiet for a long time and let Geertjan talk.
Yes, so let me respond quite quickly. What I think is special about Java is, on the one hand, all these things that have been mentioned, portability and GC and so on, but also the stability of the language and the static typing. And because of the
today is just a different day for him.
His network does not want to talk about Java. All right.
Yeah, the language.
He must be running a C# network.
Anyway, one good feature to me about Java is something outside the technical perspective, is the community. So the Java community is vibrant, is huge. It has a huge organization behind the Java heart. For example, I guess Java is the unique language that has more than one implementation. And probably, I'm not sure about PHP. I think no. And Java has
Only one.
like
There's only one
20.
implementation that matters.
Yeah, Java has like 20, 25 implementations in each version. And one thing about Java, if you go in the history, sometimes Sun and Oracle decided to stop some feature, and the community answered with, "Okay, you can stop here and you can keep that and keep moving." And that's happened, for example, with Java EE, right? So, Java EE, Oracle decided to decrease the number of work on that platform, and the community decided to go ahead and move that IP to Eclipse Foundation. And guess what? Right now we have the Jakarta EE under Eclipse Foundation umbrella. And that usually does not happen in any kind of language. For example, if probably Microsoft decided to stop C#, the language is gone. And it's something that happened with Java. We have a couple of companies behind. We have a couple of communities behind. We have several know-how communities and so on. So the community to me is the nicest feature ever.
And that the fact that you can have features like that move from one organization to another, or libraries move from one organization to another, that's the kind of thing that Java, being one of the early open source languages, really enables. If you have a completely proprietary ecosystem, that's just not a thing. But since so much of the Java ecosystem was open source early on, it meant both the culture and the legal permission was there to do that kind of pickup of projects.
Yeah, one information that I'm not sure if that's true, but when Java was born, it was born as a public source. Why not Java was born as open source? Because Java was born in 95, and the open source was born in 98. And probably if the open source become early, Java was born as open source as well.
No, free software predated the term open source by a decade and a half. So
okay, don't discuss about free software open source right now. That's Java topic, right? But anyway, if you're looking just for open source, is Java become early than the Open Source Institute?
That's a very interesting point with the OpenJDK community. It's not just the users, but if you think about the contributors to the OpenJDK project, in 2006, I was still I was working with the Sun JDK at that time, and Sun open sourced the hotspot virtual machine itself. And then, if you see right from the 2007 timeframe, Red Hat joined the OpenJDK community. They signed their OCA. It used to be called Sun Contributors Agreement back then. They also did their TCK licensing and everything. Then there was this whole concept of Porter's Group, which is what I was talking about, like bringing Java to every platform that's out there. And they did such a great job. And then IBM joined, and then Apple stopped doing their own Java SDK, and they moved to OpenJDK, and everybody just contributed and made the ecosystem richer. And so, yeah, I totally agree that the community is what makes Java so vibrant.
Yeah, we see that in a lot of languages. The syntax isn't what matters. What matters is the people who are using the syntax.
And I think also early on, Sun was focused on bringing Java to universities. And so a lot of the enthusiasm came from a very early stage in the developer's life at colleges and at universities. There was this Sun ambassadors concept, and that's where a lot of developers who are involved in the Java community now originally came from.
So one of the things
that's
I wanted
awesome.
to ask about, so how for a decade or so, Java was the language at universities. If you were taking computer science classes, they were taught in Java.
Right.
So that was a deliberate move by Sun to push it into academia. Is that how that happened?
I mean, that's the right place to introduce people to a new language, at the place where they're learning about programming. Definitely.
So how did that then impact the ecosystem overall? I come from a PHP background. We often talk about PHP has a lot of junior developers because it's such an easy language to learn, which then impacts the community and impacts the ecosystem and so on. Did that kind of have the same effect in Java, with a lot of people learning Java as their first or only language right in school?
I think that's true. I think John froze again. I think that's a good point of view, and it was not just Java, but the prevalence of thin clients and Solaris OS. All these things got people more comfortable with not just the language. I think even back then, in the university, people used to do MP. Um, like programming in Java, so message passing, MP.
Okay.
Yeah. So all these things like whatever streams was back then, and Java was used for that. So I mean, these kind of newer programming concepts based on a language that's comfortable because you've learned it at school or at your college became a comfort zone for people like me, I guess, And so I do agree that Sun did a deliberate move with expanding Java into the education system. And I used to have a thin client from my Sun days. I don't know where it is now, but I thought that was one of the most brilliant concepts, to be able to just hop onto a thin client and store everything in what we call cloud now. And back then it was different, but yeah.
It's just about 15 years too early.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about all these things, and Sun was an innovation factory, and I'm proud to be an ex-Sun employee.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I remember that small device that was Sunspot, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
right now called the IoT, right? Something pretty similar.
Yeah, the smart, it has the smart card chips and stuff like that. That Sun, designed and everything too. Yeah, I mean, these days, smart card means a little bit different, but the concepts are similar. Yeah.
And also, when you look at where all the people are now who were working in Sun Microsystems back then, I mean, they're in Microsoft, they're in Azure, they're in Google, they're in Red Hat, they're in all these places that are, driving the ecosystem forward. Many of those people come originally from Sun Microsystems.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Exxon factor. So Java's 25 years old now. What would you say in that time, the language has evolved, the ecosystem has evolved. What would you say was the most important change since the early days in Java, the language and the JVM, or in the way the community is run? What's the biggest and most important change?
I think there's quite a few, but in terms of the language, I would say that the functional programming that has been introduced most recently is a major breakthrough and provides a whole different way of thinking about programming. And it's not a big deal in other languages. It's been built in from the very beginning. But in the case of Java, since it has this long history going way back into the 90s, when there wasn't such a thing, it had to be injected into it much later on. But I think that on the programming level is the major difference that has been made over the past few years.
I'm a big fan of functional programming, and I'm working on doing that same kind of push in PHP. So I'm totally in for that.
Good luck. Yeah, I totally agree. If you take it up a notch, it's the adaptability of Java, right? I mean, being able to open the JVM to different languages that can run on top of the JVM. I think the move to Graal VM, which kind of opens it up to polyglot programming. The functional, it still has a long way to go with respect to functional programming, because it's right now, if you think about it, like functions as a service or those Lambda functions, Java still has a lot of space to fill, but the concepts, such as the newer concepts, such as the Project Loom, like fibers and everything, I hope they help us fill in gaps and be able to deploy in native situations. Yeah, so I think adaptability is number one thing that's keeping Java alive, actually.
So now we've talked about this a couple of times. You've touched on this. We've talked about Java and we've talked about the JVM, and those are different things. So let's break that down. Java versus JVM in freshman level differences.
To me, if you think about Java, it's the programming language. Like if I know people sometimes use it interchangeably, but a Java virtual machine is anything that is something that's the underlying machine that can abstract your programming layer from what needs to be generated to run on the underlying architecture. So you could be programming in Java, Groovy, or Kotlin, and you could still run on the JVM. So JVM is kind of like a universal, not quite universal, but that's where the word polyglot VM comes from. So that kind of runs any language on your architecture, as long as you get bytecodes out of that language, and then eventually you turn bytecodes into machine code. And so that's how I would describe the difference.
I really see the JVM as a common operating system that runs on top of the operating system. So it runs on top of Windows or Mac or whatever, and on top of that you do your Java programming, so that it works on all those different operating systems.
And there's how many languages now available for the JVM? Or I suppose widely available?
Well, a lot.
Yeah.
The last time that I checked was almost 100,
Really?
probably more right
Wow,
now. Yes.
I thought it was more like in the 7 or 8 range.
And there are several languages that the JVM implementation run faster than the original one. And that happened, I'm not sure yet, but in the past, Ruby, the JRuby was faster in the JVM than the Ruby itself. And that happened with several languages.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's the J equivalent of your native, whatever the original language used to be. Yeah, that's correct.
I recall someone at one point had ported PHP to the JVM. It was an interesting project. Never really took off, but it was an interesting idea. So Java's done a lot right, obviously, to get this far. What's it done wrong? What would you say is the biggest mistake or misstep that Java, the language, Java, the community has made in the last 25 years? Without naming names, it's okay.
I think you should repeat the question, because we had lost. Yeah.
Catch back. So the question was, Java's obviously done a lot right to the last 25 years, but what would you say has it done wrong? What's its biggest misstep, either as a language or as a community or as an ecosystem?
It's quite a difficult question.
I blame Otavio for this question.
Monica, what would you say? I can't think of anything, to be honest.
So a while back, and my background is embedded systems, and I come from C++ and to Java, and that's why Hotspot VM, the virtual machine, was something I immediately gravitated to. About 15 years ago, I was talking to this hardware architect, and he was lamenting the fact that Java doesn't support unsigned ints, right? And then he walked me through this why we need it, because of course, if you come from C, C++, data is unsigned, and then you have this lack of flexibility between C and Java, and then you basically do from 32-bit to 16 and so on and so forth. And of course you can do this bitwise correction and all those things that we were working at, understanding how we can handle the data that was coming in. And so I don't know if it's a misstep or not, but that was something that I've heard people complain, especially if you talk to people coming in from architectural and embedded background. That would be my thing.
Yeah, I think in terms of one thing that kind of happened because of the transition from Sun to Oracle, with Sun having very different interests to Oracle's, that some things have kind of dropped by the wayside. And one of those is in the area of documentation and having one clear centralized place where all the information is found around the latest release, around fixes and things like that. And so this allows me to quickly introduce my little topic of what we're doing at FUJE, which is providing a place for friends of OpenJDK, so that's everybody who's involved with Java, to have one location where all the information is found, where there are blog posts, where there are tweets, but in particular where you can find a common place for where to find all the different OpenJDK distributions, where to download them from, what the differences are between them, what the differences are between one JDK version and the next, what the fixes are, because what Oracle has introduced is a quarterly release cycle. And so that's very nice. It's sped things up. But at the same time, do you know what's in the latest release? Do you know what the latest fixes are? And do you know which ones are most relevant to you? And that is the kind of information that we're trying to gather together on FUJE. And we're hoping that everyone wants to get involved with that to really build up that community information together. So that's FUJE.io, FOOJAY. Friends of OpenJDK, and J as a bird.io. And this is where we are gathering all this information together into one centralized location.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Yes, do that.
Okay, so I have one question because Java has more than 25 years right now, right? And when Java was born, nobody mentioned about cloud. But right now we have cloud friendly, cloud ready, and cloud native. My question is for you guys, what is the biggest challenge in the Java world to move on in the cloud age?
So from my perspective, it's how to become lighter, like lighter as a runtime environment, lighter as in packaging, lighter as in the overhead. So if you're running natively versus running in a container versus whatever, seamless and lighter is something that I see Java working towards, as well as I see still more work that needs to be done. Cloud native is something very interesting as well, but I'll stop right here if Geertjan wants to talk. I think we lost him again. Sorry.
You may want to, but the network disagrees. So keep going.
Yeah. So cloud native is pretty interesting as well, and the whole concept of native image and being able to. So it's kind of like, are we moving away and from the adaptive JIT into this kind of native image, and are we okay with staying there, with not having fully optimized code, but being able to deliver and run right? So basically, ramp up or startup times are reduced to a minimum. So those kind of, so we're kind of you see a shift in the way we're moving away from fully optimized and fully adaptive to just these kind of single images, and then you can pretty much cache JIT now and everything, all this fun stuff that's happening, which is a great evolution. and I think that is what will keep people coming back to Java. So I think it's a good thing in general.
I think also that with the shift to the cloud over the past years, Java has increasingly been moving to the back end. And it's increasingly less something that you see visually in the browser. I mean, that's kind of the place where you see JavaScript more commonly nowadays. So it's interesting to kind of figure out what is the official place for Java in the cloud story, and what out-of-the-box solutions can Java bring? Because what you find now is technologies like Kubernetes being very popular, and Spring Boot being very popular, and these are all frameworks and technologies on top of Java. But what could Java itself provide in the cloud space natively? From within the Openjdk itself is also something that maybe it's something to think about in the next 25 years.
And that actually is a good segue. So thinking about cloud type stuff, what else does Java need to do to stay relevant for the next quarter century?
I think one thing that's been really good is the breaking up of Java into modules. So the modularity that's been brought in is going to enable, and it already has enabled, a breakdown into what are called compact profiles. So there are subsets of Java that are clustered together, potentially enabling us to come up with a lighter version of Java based on that module system that might be suited for more lightweight purposes in the context of the cloud.
Now, is that breaking up the standard library, or is it actually certain syntax that only works in certain variations of Java?
Well, it's a project called Jigsaw, which can be used within applications written in Java, but which was originally created to break up the Openjdk itself into smaller pieces. And so the Openjdk is a subset of a large number of modules, which can be clustered together into higher groups, like profiles, and enabling us to potentially create compact profiles more targeted towards cloud purposes, for example.
What I'm getting at, those modules, at what level are they breaking down? Are they like you're leaving out the JNI part of the standard library when you don't need it, or are you leaving out inner classes when you don't need it? Because those are two very different things. What exactly is different between these different variations you're talking about?
Maybe Monica wants to add something in here.
Yeah, so I think the whole concept of Java base. So base would be things like that you would need. So if you do, for example, if you look at the modules that go into a Hello World program, you'd see basically all of those covered in Java base. But I think talking about lightweight, it's you create an entire runtime and whatever you need. So for example, if I want to package my application that I want to run in the cloud, I would find out the dependency graph. And then I'll make sure that those modules that my application depends on I can package that in a runtime environment. So my runtime environment doesn't need to be this bloated JRE because I'm not even using, I'm just using a quarter of the components of the modules that are that come in the standard edition. I just want just a lighter footprint of the JRE, the runtime environment, and that's what I would package. So I think it's JPackage tool, and then you use the JDepends tool to find the dependency stack of your application. So I think that's what it makes it the deployment easier, lightweight, and also optimizes replication of of your so it's a self-contained packaging. So that's what it is.
Okay. Ottavio, I'm going to ask you too, as long as you're here, since you're also a name in Java. What do you think Java needs to do to stay relevant for the next 20 years of clouds?
Lighter, that's for sure. We need to make that sure with modules and allow to have a small startup, and that actually has happened with several frameworks such as Micronauts and also Quarkus. By the way, there we had two deploy Friday about both, and we as platform SH provide both, right? So be lighter and also a full integration with containers, right? And for example, reduce the memory of management, reduce the necessity to core processor. Therefore, I can run my Java application in a small piece of cloud environment, perhaps serverless, something like that.
I think also something else to think about is we have a number of really strong IDEs, development environments, editors, Eclipse, IntelliJ, NetBeans, VS Code. And I think this is one of the reasons why Java has lasted for as long as it has, and because these tools are out there and they're more or less competing with each other. And in some places there's some cooperation, but I think that cooperation could be a lot stronger. And these are tools written in Java, so there are definitely parts that could potentially be reused between them, for example, or there could be some kind of overarching committee across these different tools to discuss common needs. I think that is one area where we could improve in the coming years, rather than purely competing, also really collaborating more on that level.
Yeah, that co-opetition balance is sometimes hard to strike, but can be very valuable.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one question back because you both are Java champion. Could you tell us what is that Java champion program?
Monica has been it longer, so she can.
So I think it's a program that was started by Sun Microsystems to identify industry-wide, community-wide contributors to the Java ecosystem. So it could be from an educational perspective. It could be from enabling users. So, like for example, Jug leaders, and it could be just bringing the community together for doing active work in enriching each developer to be able to reach out and spread the information in Java. I became a champion due to the contributions that I made to the Openjdk. I also, one of the things I was doing at Oracle was kind of enabling G1 GC performance. And I thought that was very important to talk and to let the world know about the adaptiveness and how garbage collectors are evolving to be more adaptive, more suited to and more receptive to your application changes. And at that time, there weren't that many talks on garbage collectors in general. So I started from the basics of garbage collection and to what is performance engineering, to why garbage collectors are evolving in the way they were. And I think that was something that the community recognized, and that's why that's how I became a Java champion. I think, and if I had to sum it up, I would say Java champions are friends, friendly neighborhood people that help you with any understanding Java, they make Java more approachable in a way, I think.
Yeah, I really see them as the expert group in the Java community, and a conference always tries to get a bunch of Java champions and say, look, at this conference we have the following speakers, amongst them the following Java champions. So it's a badge of honor as well, and it's a sign that you've contributed to the community, and it's something that people aspire to become. So it's a really nice combination of different things, and these are people who are really committed. These are people from outside Oracle. I left Oracle 6 months ago, so I could only become a Java champion quite recently. But there's really a rule. If you at the time of Sun, if you were working in Sun, you couldn't become a Java champion because it was an external industry a project, just like how Oracle sees it as well. But it's a really fantastic group of enthusiasts, experts in all the different areas of Java, from the tooling, to the language, to the JVM, to all these different areas. These people are involved in one way or another. So it's a collection of expert knowledge, and it's a community of friends, as Monica says.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
and Oracle is doing a great job supporting it too. I want to add that we have annual gatherings where we talk about, we get a preview of what's happening, what's upcoming, and we have a voice in that as well. So I really appreciate the program a lot.
Oh,
Nice.
nice.
Yeah.
Also, we talk about advocate and do presentation and speech about Java. Java version was always an issue to us, right? The Java community, because in the past, we need to wait like 3 years to receive a new version of something. And right now we have a version like every 6 months. And we have people who are using Java 14, people who are using Java 8, people who are using Java 11. My question is, how can you handle that bunch of version that happen right now?
Well, that's a challenge, definitely. It's quite hard to keep track, and I think also, when you go to a conference, the first question a speaker often asks is, "Which version of Java are you on?" And then you see the incredible range of, a lot of people tend to stick to the LTS releases. Currently Java 8 or 11, but there's all these versions in between, and I think this is one of the challenges. At some point, there's going to be so much divergence, people all doing different things and using different language features because they're on different JDKs, that kind of the whole coherence of the platform, there's a danger of that fragmenting to some extent. So how to keep all of that together is definitely a challenge for the coming period.
I think there's also the concept of keeping Java up to date, like adding features versus helping uh, the migration story, right? I think the toughest migration issues are people who are still at JDK 8 and getting them to anything 9 plus, which is like say 11 LTS is where they will be. And it's the entire stack that needs to be updated. So if you're using some components of Hadoop and Spark, and so all those things, you have to make sure that those are done. And it's not just the bigger ones like Hadoop and Spark, it may be the smaller dependencies that you have. It is not easy, but I think the way I put it is innovation happens at tip, right? So anything, any new feature, any new optimization, any incubator projects, any um, I don't know what they call. They don't call it optional, but like kind of testing additions to Java are added in these kind of feature releases that happen every 6 months. So I always say that yes, at any given time, depending on how big your dependency stack or how deep your dependency stack is, it'll take time to migrate. But think of that cost versus backporting costs. Because now you want these, like I think one of the biggest thing that will go into as incubator in 16, JDK 16, apart from the port that we wrote at Microsoft, is the vector API itself, right? And vector API see that as a very beneficial API for most of the cloud vendors, like databases. You can use as queries and all this fun stuff that you can now do data level parallelism, and you can bring it to the cloud. But guess what? It is in 16 and as an incubator and has not been backported. So that is a motivation to get people to move up. But also maybe the demand would be to backport it to JDK 11. So it is still the demand versus the time. It boils down to COGS. How much what are the savings to doing one thing versus the other, and I think people have the freedom to decide that.
We have a question from the audience here. Rudi Weber asks, Java having features such as lambdas and streams, and given the functional programming trend of the industry, can we expect Java to allow for an even more functional-oriented programming style in the future? Partial application, currying, and things like that. So I don't know, can we?
I would not be surprised. I mean, that's really the direction that the language is going. And once you start going in a direction that is known and established, functional programming, and there are features missing, there's going to be pressure to have those added. So definitely.
Furthermore, it's important to say Java is more than the language itself, right? We have several frameworks who has this kind of support. If you think about it, right now is a little bit hard to find somebody who create an Java application without any kind of Java framework. So it's hard to see somebody who write any kind of code without Spring, without Java EE, Jakarta EE, Microprofile, Micronauts, and Quarkus. Why did I mention that? Basically because we have a couple features that belongs to that framework. For example, in Spring, we do have Webflux that allow us to use functional program easily because it creates a wrapper in the Java functional program. And the Jakarta E and Microprofile, we have like 3 products that allow us to do exactly something. Probably it's hard to somebody outside Java understand, but basically Java has a huge environment and a huge number of frameworks and ways to do the exact same thing that's almost near to JavaScript. I guess now JavaScript is bigger than us because every second a new Java framework appear. But basically the whole point is Java, yeah, you can do that. Probably not just with the language right now, but that's coming soon. But if you want to use frameworks, you can do that.
So here's a question. Say I'm starting a brand new project and I have a choice of language. It's a green field. What types of projects would you say are Java's sweet spots? This is totally a Java type project. Java is the obvious answer for that. What type of projects is Java ideally suited for, other than everything? Don't know. Answer it once.
I think I would think of it from a different perspective. What gaps does Java need to fill yet? I think the whole idea of functions and being able to bring these kind of pure functions and immutability concepts, Java is still working on that. And sometimes there are functional languages or functional style languages, which is what Java is evolving into. It's evolving into a more of a functional style. Are not yet ready, and maybe sometimes it's just easier to use a language or a programming paradigm that does the job. So I think I see it from the other perspective, because it boils down to, from the JVM perspective, been there, and what needs to be filled in, rather than what all can be filled. Because if you ask me, oh yeah, we've done pretty much everything. We can do any server side and even client side, although startup still needs a little bit work, but we can do all these things. Even cloud, we can be in the cloud as well. But I think the small gap that we need to fill is the serverless computing and function as a service kind of stuff, and I think that's where you'll see more innovations, hopefully. Or it will be just that, hey, you just use Python or whatever, which is what people are more comfortable with. I think that's what you alluded to it earlier.
So I guess
right now we have GraalVM as well that allow us to take our Java code and move it to native application,
That's
right?
right.
So perhaps if you want to run a native code such as serverless, you probably don't need garbage collector. You don't need just-in-time compiler. You don't need any kind of improvement that Java usually does to you. So you can convert that code to native. However, if you want application like a monolith one or microservice one that need to stay at least for a while up, and usually that you have several rules, like you need to write your code as TDD, that you have ambiguous code. You need to think about object orientation, and so far. That's the point that I probably use Java, because the JVM is one feature that's amazing in the Java world, because I take my code and every time it's gonna be faster than the previous one. So everything that need performance, probably I'm gonna take to Java. For example, like Spotify did with Python, right? So in the past, Spotify wrote some Java, Python code, and then they decided to move on to Java right now, and it's happened like every time.
I would also say that if you want to use a language with a lot of documentation, a lot of books, a lot of information, a lot of courses, I mean, Java is the one to choose. It's been around for so long that the experts in it really know what they're talking about, and it's mature. And any book or course you want is out there.
Okay. So what about, Monica, you touched on this already. What would you say is Java's weak spot? Like, I have this type of project to build. Okay, Java's not the right tool. I should use something else instead. When would you say, okay, don't use Java for that? And what would you use instead? I'm taking the silence to mean you would always use Java for everything.
No. Front end is something that I usually don't use.
If you're doing front end, and in particular you're creating a shopping cart, or you're creating some hotel booking system, some relatively lightweight project, you're doing front end work, probably Java is the wrong language for that. It's great. I mean, it has a role in front end in the sense of on the Java desktop, but then you're not creating a shopping cart. Then you're creating a large logistics system or a military system or some biological system. These kinds of large systems do have a role on the desktop, either with Java Swing or Java FX, and on mobile as well. But if you're doing some kind of lightweight application with a front end, then probably Java is not the right language for the front end part of it.
Yeah, well, can you even do that anymore? I thought Java applets died years ago.
Right. Well, there's always a way, but it wouldn't be recommended.
True enough. Monica, how about you? When would you not use Java?
Like I mentioned already, but it's more convenient for me to use Python, and whenever I'm doing this kind of dealing with immutable and just writing some functions, it's very convenient. So I choose convenience over over idiomatic things, and so I choose Python in those cases. So I've done that. I'm guilty. But there's also this whole thing about, yeah, exactly. This whole thing about machine learning and stuff like that too. We have ways to go in the vector API is going to definitely help us, but still a lot of innovation that will happen in that field.
All right, I guess it's just about time to start wrapping up. Thank you, Geertjan and Monica. Do you have any closing thoughts before we sign off for the day?
I would say Java is a vibrant community of enthusiastic people all over the world, very friendly. If you want to learn a language, you want to get started programming, Java is definitely a good choice to make.
Yeah, I agree. I think Octavio touched on this about the community. Community is a strength. Community, approachability, even from the language front to the JVM to the JDK. It's if you look at, and I also say that don't be ever afraid to look at the code, to dive into the code. I again, 15, 20 years ago, I was asked what about documentation? And this was still when Sun was there, right? And I used to always say, would you rather have your engineers write code, or would you rather have them document stuff? But that has changed for me now, because back then I was like, oh, coding is so cool. And even now it is cool, but I also think from the approachability factor, if you don't have good documentation, I think it makes the language, the features, the development, the adaptability all a moot point. So I think Java is there now with all of Java champions, with the documentation out there, thanks to Geertjan's Fujay as well, bringing it all together. I think it's awesome. I also wanted to plug in this TEALS program, which is helping high school students learn learn Java and Python. And I recently became a volunteer for TEALS. I co-teach Java to underprivileged communities, to high school students in underprivileged communities, and I think that's how we spread Java. So, if ever you get an opportunity to give back, please do give back. And I hope your programming language of choice is Java.
And we'll grab a link to that and put that in the show notes as well, so people can look into that program. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you to our guests. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Geertjan. Thank you, Ottavio. For those watching at home, if any of this sounds interesting to you, you want to give Java a whirl or get back into Java after a long hiatus like me, you can run Java on Platform SH. It runs fine. And we offer several versions from, I just checked, 8, 11, 12, and 13 all run. So take your pick. Tune in next week. We're going to be talking about Ruby in the next installment in our Language Spotlight series. So tune in for that. In the meantime, go ahead and deploy. It's Friday. That makes it a great day to deploy. And we'll catch you on the internet. Take care.
Bye-bye.